Shipwreck at the Bottom of the World, the extraordinary true story of Shackleton and the Endurance. Chapter 4 The Fist of the Antarctic. For the rest of December, Endurance picked her way through the ice. Black Barrow peeled a page from the calendar in the war room every morning, counting off the days. Outside, the ocean teemed with life. Humpbacks and killer whales spouted in the distance, and the water was dotted with ice floes on which fat, blinking seals basked in the sun. Emperor penguins bowed formally to the ship and crew as they passed. Adelie penguins surveyed them from passing icebergs and called "Clark, Clark," which was the name of the expedition's biologist. The little black Adelies, with a shocking white ring around their eyes, made a comical sight for the crew as they tobogganed off the icebergs into the water. Flocks of Antarctic petrels and snow petrels accompanied the ship on its journey toward the continent, diving with high, wild screams when the crew threw their garbage overboard into the sea. While white albatrosses escorted Endurance through the ice on their magnificent motionless wings, Leonard Hussey, the meteorologist, serenaded the passing wildlife with his banjo. McNeish remarked that the penguins were particularly attracted to the banjo music. "Aye, they're queer creatures, and I'd never have been surprised to see them clapping their flippers when the doctor finished a tune. When he played good old Scots tunes, that was. They're sensible birds. They liked real music, but I can tell ye that if he played anything else, they'd break away and rush off in a panic." Hussey's version of the penguins' taste was somehow different. They liked the Negro spirituals and Irish jigs, a strong favorite of which they never tired was long, long way to Tipperary. But when I turned to play Scottish music, well, they just fled in horror, making off as fast as their short legs would carry them. The animals on board provided entertainment, too. Mrs. Chippy, who despite the name was actually a tomcat, discovered that he could stroll along the tops of the dog kennels just out of reach of the snapping jaws. The half-wolf sled dogs became frantic with bloodlust whenever the cat ambled over their heads. Also on board were 2 pigs purchased by McNeish for future pork roast, as well as the rats and mice that stowed away on the ship. Mrs. Chippy was too well fed to bother hunting, preferring to torment the dogs and dine on scraps from the galley. The ship made progress, slow progress. Shackleton had estimated a rate of travel that would put him in the continent by the end of December, but by Christmas they still hadn't passed the Antarctic Circle. The holiday was celebrated with turtle soup, jugged hare, whitebait, a type of fish, minced pies, figs, and plum pudding prepared by the cook, Charles Green, when the crew raised their glasses of stout and rum to Christmas carols and toasted to our sweethearts and wives. The answer came back, "May they never meet." As the last days of 1914 ran out, Endurance continued to creep southward through the Weddell Sea. The course was never a straight one. Sometimes the ship found a lead of open water to the south and followed that with all speed. Other times, worsely, the skipper had to sail the ship west along the edge of the pack, searching for open water to enter, even sailing north from time to time when the pack was impenetrable or standing still, waiting for a lead. Feeling like a rat in a trap, Worsley looked for leads from the crow's nest and signaled the course to the man on the bridge. Ice blink, a white glare on the undersides of the clouds, indicated pack ice ahead. A water sky, a dark reflection on the clouds, showed where the open water lay. Shackleton explained, "Worsley, Wild, and I, the 3 officers, kept 3 watches while we were working through the pack. so that we had 2 officers on deck at all time. The carpenter had rigged a 6-foot wooden semaphone on the bridge to enable the navigating officers to give the seamen or scientists at the wheel the direction and the exact amount of helm required. This device saved time as well as the effort of shouting. Occasionally, when the frigid atmosphere was charged with water, every rope and spar on the ship was frosted white, making Endurance look like another species of sparkling white iceberg as it nosed its way through the pack. When the sun came out, icicles fell from the shrouds and shattered like glass on the decks below. Sometimes open leads of water in all directions were wreathed with wisps of frost smoke as the water began to freeze, and the caption and picture on page 19. Endurance begins to pick its way through the ice. December 9, 1914. Shackleton wrote in his diary, "I have been prepared for evil conditions in the Weddell Sea, but had hoped that in December and January the pack would be loose, even if no open water was to be found. What we were encountering was fairly dense pack of a very obstinate nature." Shackleton commented that the effect resembled the smoke from a prairie fire. The sun never set, and even when there was fog in the dark, often the crystalline hair formed mirages, and the sailors saw icebergs suspended upside down on the horizon. These mirages made navigation around the bergs very dangerous, because it is often very hard to tell what was a real iceberg and what was a phantom. Knowing the difference was critical, especially since Endurance often passed more than 400 bergs in a 24-hour period. It was a crowded sea. On New Year's Eve, they crossed the Antarctic Circle at last, and some of the men gathered on the bridge to sing Auld Lang Syne, with an accompaniment of dog howls. The ice grew denser. The open water became harder and harder to find. There was no sign that the pack was opening up at all. Day and night, ice growled and scraped along the sides of the ship. The men heard it grinding while they slept, while they ate and played their cards, while they stoked the engines or read the charts. When the fog and ice made progress impossible, Shackleton ordered the ship moored to a large iceberg or float. Then the men and dogs could take advantage of the wide, flat floes to get some exercise. Hockey and soccer games were a sport of choice among the men. As for the dogs, they could chase penguins and run wild without going too far. On all sides was the frigid sea, where killer whales cruised in search of a meal. These beasts have a habit of locating a resting seal by looking over the edge of the floe and then striking through the ice from below in search of a meal. They would not distinguish between a seal and a man, Shackleton noted. The picture and caption on page 20, "To our sweethearts and wives, may they never meet." And the picture and caption on page 21, a soccer game on ice during a holdup, waiting for a lead to open so the ship could continue. Page 22. On one occasion, the Endurance was moored to a floe. The crew hauled out the motor sledge. Ord Lees, the motor expert, got the engine going and marched and pretended it was an ice cream wagon. Several sailors did imitations of Cockney boys begging for a treat as Marston hammed it up on the ice cream vendor. When the kidding was done, however, the men gave the motor sledge a test run. On the uneven surface of the ice, the machine turned out to be awkward and impractical, and plans to use it were abandoned. As the days went on, Endurance crept forward through leads that closed in behind her. Open water was becoming harder and harder to find. A shifting mass of ice stretched from one horizon to the next. 2.5 weeks into the new year, Hurley wrote in his diary, "It is now 7 weeks since we entered the pack ice, and since then it has been almost an incessant battle. The weather was not improving, and the ice showed no signs of opening. On the next day, January 19th, the first of the Antarctic closed around the ship. Endurance was surrounded by ice pack, with no open water in sight. They had sailed 12,000 miles from London. They had picked their way through 1,000 miles of ice pack. Now they were less than 100 miles from the continent itself, but Endurance would never reach it. The picture and caption on page 22, a huge iceberg observed from the ship, January 16, 1915. The picture and caption on page 23, the sea is frozen into an impenetrable barrier of crushed floes, January 1915.